She was throwing away her grandfather's wardrobe when she noticed something odd about the back panel. What she found inside wasn't just life-changing money. It was evidence of a secret that powerful families had spent 60 years trying to bury. And now they wanted it back. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The estate sale was supposed to start at 8 a.m., but the vultures arrived at dawn. Emma Rodriguez stood in her grandfather's driveway, watching strangers paw through boxes of his belongings like they were shopping at a thrift store. A man in an expensive suit examined her grandfather's toolbox. A woman with perfectly manicured nails held up a set of china plates, checking for chips before offering $5 for the entire set. Emma wanted to scream at them. These weren't just objects. They were pieces of Arthur Chen's life. The coffee mug he'd used every morning for 40 years. The reading glasses he'd left on his nightstand. The cardigan with patches on the elbows that he'd worn until it was practically threadbare. But Emma didn't have the luxury of sentimentality. She had exactly 11 days before the bank foreclosed on her house. She owed $47,000 in medical bills from her daughter Lily's leukemia treatment last year. Her car had been repossessed 3 weeks ago. She was a 34-year-old single mother working 2 jobs and still drowning in debt. And now her grandfather, her last living family member, the man who'd raised her after her parents died, was gone. Heart attack at 82, quick and painless, they said. He'd left her his house in Riverside, a 3-bedroom craftsman that needed $200,000 in repairs it would never get. The house was already in foreclosure. The bank wanted it cleared out by the end of the month. So here she was, selling off the only inheritance she'd ever receive, hoping to scrape together enough money to keep her own roof over her and Lily's heads for another few months. A heavy-set woman approached, pointing at the bedroom furniture visible through the front door. How much for the wardrobe? That big wooden piece. Emma followed her gaze. Her grandfather's wardrobe. Solid oak, probably from the 1940s, massive and ornate with carved details across the doors. It took up an entire wall of the bedroom. I'm not sure I'm selling that, Emma said automatically. The woman frowned. Why not? You can't move it. Thing probably weighs 500 pounds. No one else is going to want it. I'll give you $100. $100? Emma's voice rose. That's solid oak, handcrafted. It's old furniture that no one wants, the woman interrupted. $100. Take it or leave it. Emma wanted to tell her to leave it, but $100 was $100. Every dollar mattered when you were counting pennies for milk and bread. Let me think about it, Emma said. The woman shrugged and moved on to inspect a box of books. Emma stood there, staring at the wardrobe through the open door. Her grandfather had kept that piece for as long as she could remember. It had been in his bedroom in the old house in San Francisco, then moved here when he retired to Riverside 15 years ago. She'd asked him once why he kept such an impractical piece of furniture. Most people use closets or smaller dressers. But Arthur had just smiled and said some things were worth keeping, even if they took up space. By noon, Emma had sold most of the small items: dishes, books, tools, linens. She'd made $847. Not nearly enough, but it was something. The larger furniture pieces, the bed, the dresser, the dining table, would go to a consignment shop tomorrow. And the wardrobe? She went inside to look at it properly. The bedroom was empty now, except for this one massive piece. In the afternoon light streaming through the window, she could see the craftsmanship clearly. Intricate carvings of flowers and vines covered the door panels. The wood was dark with age, but still beautiful. She opened the doors. Empty except for a few wire hangers. The interior smelled like cedar and her grandfather's Old Spice cologne. The scent hit her like a physical blow. She could see him clearly, standing here in his undershirt and slacks, carefully selecting a button-down shirt for church, humming off-key while he got dressed. Emma's throat tightened. She missed him so much it hurt. He'd been her anchor, her safe place, the only person who'd never judged her for getting pregnant at 19, for dropping out of college, for struggling. He'd helped however he could, babysitting Lily, slipping Emma $50 here and there when money was tight, always believing she'd get through it. And now he was gone, and she was selling his things to strangers, and it felt like betrayal. She was about to close the wardrobe doors when she noticed something odd. The back panel didn't quite sit flush. There was a tiny gap along the right side, barely visible. Emma frowned. She knocked on the back panel. It sounded hollow. That didn't make sense. The wardrobe was solid wood throughout. She ran her fingers along the edge, looking for there a small indentation, like a catch or release mechanism. She pressed it. Nothing happened. She tried sliding it. Still nothing. Then she pushed upward while pulling the panel toward her. The entire back panel swung open on hidden hinges. Emma gasped. Behind the false back was a hollow space, maybe 8 inches deep, running the full height and width of the wardrobe. And inside that space were boxes. Not cardboard boxes, metal document boxes, the kind designed to protect important papers from fire and moisture. They were stacked carefully, filling the entire hidden compartment. Emma's hands shook as she pulled out the first box. It was heavy, surprisingly heavy. She sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were papers. Hundreds of papers. No, not just papers, bonds. Government bonds, corporate bonds, municipal bonds, all carefully preserved in archival sleeves. She pulled one out at random. United States Savings Bond, Series E, issue date, March 15th, 1945, face value, $10,000 maturity, March 15th, 1955. Her heart hammered. This bond had matured almost 70 years ago. Was it still worth anything? She grabbed another. State of California General Obligation Bond, issue date, June 1st, 1950, face value, $25,000 maturity, June 1st, 1980. Another. Pacific Railroad Company Bond, issue date, October 12th, 1948, face value, $50,000, coupon rate, 5%. Emma sat back on her heels, staring at the box. Then she looked at the hidden compartment. There were at least 20 more boxes in there. Maybe more. With shaking hands, she pulled out a second box. More bonds. A third box, certificates of deposit from banks that might not even exist anymore. A fourth box, stock certificates, hundreds of them, from companies she recognized and many she didn't. Emma's mind raced. Her grandfather had hidden this, had built a false back into his wardrobe and filled it with what? A fortune? Or worthless paper? She had no idea if any of these bonds and certificates were still valid, still redeemable. Some were decades past their maturity dates. But there were so many of them. Even if only a fraction were still good, even if they were worth only a fraction of their face values. She did quick mental math, adding up just the face value she could see in the boxes she'd opened. $10,000 here, $25,000 there, $50,000, $100,000. The numbers climbed rapidly past $1 million, then $5 million, then $10 million. Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the papers. Emma sat on the floor of the empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes of bonds and certificates, and tried not to hyperventilate. She had no idea what she'd found, no idea what it meant, no idea if it was legal, if it was real, if it was hers to keep. All she knew was that her grandfather, quiet, humble Arthur Chen, who'd worked as a postal clerk for 40 years and lived in modest homes and driven used cars, had hidden what might be tens of millions of dollars in the back of his wardrobe. And he'd never told her, never mentioned it, had taken the secret to his grave. Why? A voice called from outside. "Ma'am, you still selling stuff?" Emma scrambled to her feet, quickly closing the metal boxes and shoving them back into the hidden compartment. She shut the false panel. It clicked back into place seamlessly, looking like nothing more than the ordinary back of a wardrobe. "Just a minute," she called back, her voice shaky. She took a breath, trying to steady herself. Then she walked outside on legs that felt like rubber. The heavy-set woman from earlier was back. "Made up your mind about the wardrobe? $100 still stands." Emma looked at her, looked at this stranger who wanted to buy the one piece of furniture that held her grandfather's deepest secret. $100, Emma heard herself say. "You know what? I think I'm going to keep it after all." The woman rolled her eyes. "Suit yourself. Good luck moving that monster." After the woman left, Emma went back inside and locked the door. She sat down in front of the wardrobe and just stared at it. What had her grandfather been hiding? And more importantly, Why? That night, after Lily was asleep, Emma started researching. She pulled out her laptop, old, slow, but functional, and began searching for information about vintage bonds and their potential value. What she found both encouraged and terrified her. Many old bonds, even those past maturity, were still redeemable. The U.S. government honored savings bonds indefinitely. Some corporate bonds could be worth far more than their face value if the companies had grown significantly. Municipal bonds often accrued interest even after maturity until they were claimed. But there were also complications. Bonds purchased with illicit funds could be seized. Stolen bonds were worthless to anyone but their legal owner. And large sums suddenly appearing raised questions. IRS questions, legal questions, criminal questions. Emma needed help. Professional help. But who could she trust? She searched for Bond Authentication Attorney Los Angeles and found dozens of firms. Too many to know which was legitimate, which was competent, which wouldn't try to steal from her or report her to authorities before she understood what she had. She was still searching when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Hello. Is this Emma Rodriguez? A man's voice, older, refined. Yes. Who's this? My name is Harrison Webb. I'm an attorney representing the Chen family estate. Emma's blood ran cold. My grandfather's estate? I'm his only living relative. There's no estate, just debts. I understand this must be confusing. Perhaps we could meet? There are some matters regarding your grandfather's holdings that require discussion. Emma's mouth went dry. Holdings? Yes. I believe you recently conducted an estate sale at your grandfather's residence. What do you know about that? Her voice came out sharper than intended. A pause. Miss Rodriguez, I've been the Chun family attorney for 40 years. I was notified of Arthur's passing. I apologize for not reaching out sooner, but I wanted to give you time to grieve. However, certain parties have become aware of the estate sale. And what parties? What are you talking about? Another pause, longer this time. Perhaps this conversation would be better had in person. Would tomorrow morning work? I can meet you at the Riverside House. I don't know you. Why would I? Miss Rodriguez, please. This is important. There are people who have been looking for certain items that may have been in your grandfather's possession. Items of considerable value. If you found anything unusual, anything hidden, you need legal representation before word gets out. And word always gets out. Emma's heart pounded. I haven't found anything. I see. His tone suggested he didn't believe her. Nevertheless, I think we should meet. For your protection as much as anything else. These aren't people you want to deal with alone. What people? But Harrison Webb had already hung up. Emma sat staring at her phone, terror and confusion warring inside her. Someone knew. Somehow, someone knew about the wardrobe, about the hidden compartment, about the bonds. But how? She'd only discovered them hours ago. Unless her grandfather's death hadn't been as natural as everyone assumed. Unless someone had been watching, waiting for Arthur to die, so they could come looking for what he'd hidden. Unless Emma had just inherited not just a fortune, but also the danger that came with it. She went to check on Lily. Her daughter was sleeping peacefully, dark hair spread across the pillow, face relaxed in a way it rarely was during her waking hours. Lily had been through so much already. The cancer, the chemotherapy, the fear. She was in remission now, thank God, but the trauma lingered. She had nightmares. She was anxious about Emma leaving, terrified of being alone. The last thing she needed was more chaos, more fear, more uncertainty. Emma stood in the doorway watching her daughter sleep and made a decision. Tomorrow she would meet with this Harrison Webb, but she wouldn't trust him. She'd be careful, cautious, smart. She'd protect Lily and herself, no matter what. And she would find out why her grandfather, the kindest, gentlest man she'd ever known, had hidden millions of dollars in bonds behind a false panel in his wardrobe and had never said a word about it to anyone. The next morning, Harrison Webb arrived exactly on time. He was in his late 60s, tall and distinguished with silver hair and an expensive suit that probably cost more than Emma made in a month. He carried a leather briefcase and had the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to. Emma met him at the door, but didn't invite him in immediately. Show me identification. He smiled slightly, not unkind, but knowing, like he appreciated her caution. He produced a driver's license and a business card. Harrison Webb, attorney at law, specializing in estate planning and trust management. The address was in San Francisco. Emma took a photo of both with her phone, then stepped aside to let him in. "Thank you for seeing me, Miss Rodriguez. I know this must be very confusing. You could say that. Start explaining." They sat in the living room, empty now except for a folding chair and a small table Emma had kept for herself. Harrison set his briefcase on the table and opened it. "Your grandfather, Arthur Chen, was a remarkable man. He worked for the Postal Service for 40 years, lived modestly, and to most people seemed quite ordinary. But Arthur had a secret. He was also one of the most successful amateur investors of his generation." Emma blinked. "Investor?" "Yes." Starting in the 1940s, when he was in his early 20s, Arthur began purchasing government bonds, corporate securities, and other financial instruments. He was extraordinarily shrewd. He bought bonds from companies that later became giants: early IBM stock, AT&T bonds, General Electric certificates. He invested in municipal projects that paid dividends for decades. He was patient, disciplined, and very, very smart. If he was so successful, why did he live like he had no money? Emma's voice cracked. Why did he work until he was 80? Why didn't he ever help you? Harrison's expression softened. He wanted to. Believe me, he desperately wanted to. But he couldn't, because the money wasn't entirely his. Emma's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" In 1947, Arthur worked briefly for a financial firm in San Francisco, just for a few months, doing clerical work. During that time, he became aware of certain irregularities. The firm was engaged in fraud, selling worthless bonds to elderly investors, pocketing the money, destroying the evidence. Arthur copied documents, collected proof, and planned to go to the authorities. Harrison paused, his face grave. But before he could, something happened. The firm's primary target, a wealthy widow named Margaret Thornton, died. Her family claimed it was suicide, brought on by the shame of losing her fortune. But Arthur believed she was murdered. He believed the firm had killed her to silence her before she could expose them. Emma's hands clenched. Did he go to the police? He tried, but the firm had connections, politicians, judges, police officers on their payroll. Arthur's accusations went nowhere. No investigation was opened. The firm continued operating for another decade before finally collapsing in a different scandal. So what did my grandfather do? He did the only thing he could. He stole their bonds. Emma's breath caught. He what? The firm kept bonds and certificates from their victims in a vault. Arthur had access as a clerk. One night, he took everything he could carry and disappeared. Not to keep the money for himself, to protect it, to make sure those bonds didn't disappear into the firm's coffers, that someday they might be returned to the rightful owners or their heirs. Harrison pulled a folder from his briefcase. This is a list of the bonds Arthur took. Government bonds, corporate certificates, municipal debt instruments, all purchased with money stolen from victims. Total face value in 1947, approximately $2 million. Current estimated value, accounting for maturity dates, interest accrual, stock splits, and corporate growth. He slid a paper across the table. Emma looked at the number. $203 million. The room spun. Emma gripped the edge of the table, trying to breathe. $203 million, she whispered. Approximately. Some bonds may be more valuable, some less. Authentication and appraisal will take time. But yes, roughly $203 million. And it's not mine. Legally, it's complicated. The firm that originally defrauded investors no longer exists. Many of the victims are dead. Their heirs, if they exist, will be difficult to locate. Arthur spent 75 years protecting these bonds, keeping them safe, waiting for a time when they could be properly adjudicated. Now that time has come. Why now? Why not when he was alive? Harrison's expression was sad. Because he was afraid. The firm may be gone, but some of its principles are still alive. Powerful people who've spent decades wondering what happened. To those bonds who've waited for Arthur to slip up, to try redeeming them, to reveal where he'd hidden them. And now he's dead. Yes, And certain parties believe that with Arthur gone, they can finally claim what they consider theirs. Emma's voice hardened. The money they stole? From their perspective, the money Arthur stole. They don't see themselves as criminals. They see themselves as businessmen who were robbed, and they want their property back. That's insane. That's entitlement. These are people who've never faced consequences for their actions, who believe wealth grants them immunity. And they're coming for those bonds, Emma. Make no mistake about that. A chill ran down Emma's spine. What do they want from me? They want you to turn over the bonds voluntarily. They'll offer you a finder's fee, maybe 1%, maybe 5% if you're lucky. Enough to solve your immediate financial problems and make you go away quietly. And if I refuse? Harrison met her eyes steadily. Then they'll sue you. They'll claim the bonds were stolen property, that you have no legal right to them. They'll drag you through court for years, bleeding you dry with legal fees until you have no choice but to settle for whatever scraps they offer. But you said the firm doesn't exist anymore. The firm doesn't, but its founders had children. Those children now run investment companies, law firms, political dynasties. They have resources you can't imagine, and they've been waiting 75 years for this moment. They're not going to let some single mother walk away with $203 million without a fight. Emma felt sick. So I'm screwed either way. Take pennies now or fight and lose everything. Not necessarily. Harrison pulled out another document. I prepared a legal strategy. We file suit to have the bonds adjudicated properly. We locate heirs of the original victims and offer restitution. We work with federal authorities to document the original fraud. We turn this into a legal case about justice for victims, not about two parties fighting over stolen money. That way, we control the narrative. I'm offering to represent you. Pro bono initially, with a small percentage if we prevail. 10%, which would still leave you with over $180 million after victim restitution is paid. Emma stared at him. Why would you do that? Because Arthur Chen was my friend. Because he spent his entire adult life protecting these bonds when he could have spent them, sold them, lived like a king. He chose principle over profit. I'd like to honor that by making sure his granddaughter isn't steamrolled by the same corrupt system he fought against. It sounded good. It sounded noble. But Emma had been lied to too many times to just accept it. How do I know you're not working with them? How do I know this isn't a setup to get me to hand over the bonds? Harrison smiled sadly. You don't. You can't. All you have is my word and your instincts. Arthur trusted me. I'm asking you to do the same. Emma looked at this stranger, this man offering to help, and she thought about her grandfather. Arthur had trusted someone to keep his secret. He must have had plans for what would happen after his death. Maybe Harrison Webb was part of those plans. Or maybe this was a trap. She had no way to know. I need time to think about this. You don't have much time. These people already know Arthur is dead. They're probably already planning their next move. Every day you wait is a day they get closer. I need time, Emma repeated firmly. Harrison nodded. He stood, closing his briefcase. I understand. But Emma, he hesitated, then continued. Don't try to handle this alone. Don't try to redeem the bonds yourself, or move them, or hide them somewhere else. That's exactly what they're waiting for. Any suspicious financial activity will trigger alerts, and then they'll pounce. Your best protection right now is inaction. Keep the bonds exactly where they are. Don't tell anyone about them. And decide quickly whether you trust me or not, because when they come, and they will come, you're going to need someone in your corner. He left his card on the table and walked out. Emma sat alone in the empty house, head spinning. $203 million. Fraud. Murder. Powerful enemies waiting for her to make a mistake. And her grandfather had carried this burden for 75 years, never spending a dime, never telling anyone, protecting bonds that belonged to people he'd never met, all because it was the right thing to do. Emma pulled out her phone and called the only person she trusted completely. Hey, Emma, her best friend Jenna answered. What's up? Can you pick up Lily from school today and keep her overnight? Something's come up. Of course. Is everything okay? I don't know yet. I'll explain later. Thank you, Jenna. After she hung up, Emma went to the bedroom and opened the wardrobe. She pressed the hidden catch and swung open the false back panel. looking at the rows of metal boxes that represented $203 million and 75 years of secrets. Her grandfather had fought his entire life to protect these bonds, to keep them safe until justice could be served. Now that fight had fallen to her, and Emma had a choice to make. Walk away with the finder's fee and live comfortably but safely, or fight for what her grandfather believed in, risk everything, and possibly change not just her life but the lives of the fraud victims' families who'd been waiting 3 generations for justice. She thought about Lily, about giving her daughter security, education, a future without fear of medical bills or evictions or going hungry. She thought about herself, 34 years old, exhausted, drowning in debt, working jobs that barely kept them afloat. She thought about how easy it would be to just take the money and run. But she also thought about Arthur Chen, about the man who'd chosen principle over profit, who'd lived modestly and worked until he was 80 so he could protect bonds that weren't even his, who'd believed that justice mattered more than personal gain, and she knew what he would want her to do. It wasn't the smart choice. It wasn't the safe choice. But was the right choice. Emma pulled out her phone and called Harrison Webb. "I'm in," she said when he answered. "Whatever it takes, I'm fighting for this. All of it. Are you absolutely certain?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway." A long pause. Then, "Your grandfather will be proud. I'll start filing paperwork today. In the meantime, lock that house down tight. Don't let anyone in. Don't talk to anyone else about this." And Emma, "Yeah. Welcome to the fight of your life. What happens next will turn this inheritance into a dangerous game of cat and mouse, reveal corruption that reaches the highest levels of power, and force Emma to choose between protecting her daughter and exposing the truth. Stay tuned to see what unfolds. If you're gripped by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more incredible tales. The lawsuit hit 3 days later. Emma was served at her job, the morning shift at a coffee shop where she'd worked for 2 years. A process server walked in, asked if she was Emma Rodriguez, and handed her a manila envelope while her coworkers and customers watched. She opened in the back room, hands shaking. Thornton Family Trust versus Emma Rodriguez. The complaint was 147 pages. She couldn't understand most of the legal language, but the basic claim was clear. The bonds in her grandfather's possession had been stolen from the Thornton family's investment firm in 1947. They were demanding immediate return of all securities, plus damages, plus legal fees. They'd attached evidence, corporate records, police reports from 1947 claiming Arthur Chen had been a suspect in a theft, testimony from witnesses who claimed Arthur had confessed to the crime. It was all lies. Or at least, Harrison had said it was all lies. The theft had happened, yes, but it wasn't theft, it was recovery. The firm had been the real criminals. But proving that 75 years later would be nearly impossible. Emma called Harrison from her car during her break. "They filed already?" "I know. I received the complaint this morning. I'm filing our response today, but Emma, there's something you need to know. The Thorntons aren't just asking for the bonds. They're asking for an immediate restraining order preventing you from moving, selling, or otherwise disposing of the securities. They want the court to seize them pending resolution of the case." "Can they do that?" "They can try. We have a hearing in 5 days. The judge will decide whether to grant the temporary restraining order. If he does, you'll have to surrender the bonds to the court's custody until the case is resolved." Emma's stomach dropped. "And if I don't, then you'll be in contempt. You could be fined, possibly jailed, and it would destroy any credibility we have. We can't win this fight by breaking the law." "But they're the criminals." "I know, but they have legal ownership documents. Forged probably, but convincing. They have witnesses. They have a paper trail. They've spent 75 years preparing for this moment, Emma. We need to be smarter than them, not just angrier." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about the bonds locked in her grandfather's wardrobe, thinking about $203 million she might lose before she ever got to use it, thinking about how unfair it was that the guilty always seemed to win. At 2 a.m., she heard something outside, a car engine, idling on her street. She got up and looked through the window. A black sedan was parked 3 houses down, lights off, engine running. She could see the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat. just sitting there, watching her house. Emma's heart raced. She grabbed her phone, ready to call 911. But then what would she say? Someone was parked on a public street? They hadn't done anything illegal. The police would come, ask the driver to move, and that would be it. And Emma would have revealed she was scared, vulnerable, aware she was being watched. The car sat there for another hour, then drove away slowly. Emma didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, she found a note tucked under her windshield wiper. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Accept the settlement offer. Walk away while you still can. No signature, no specifics, just a threat disguised as advice. Emma took a photo of the note and sent it to Harrison. He called her immediately. You need protection. I can't afford a security system. I can barely afford rent. I'm not talking about a security system. I'm talking about going public. The more people who know about this case, the safer you are. Criminals operate in darkness. Let's shine a light. What do you mean? I have a contact at the LA Times. Investigative journalist who specializes in corruption cases. Let's give her the story, the fraud, the stolen bonds, your grandfather's 75-year mission to protect them, the Thorntons' attempt to reclaim what they stole. Make this a media story. Make you sympathetic. Make them the villains. Emma hesitated. That'll make me a target. You're already a target. At least this way, you have public support. And the Thorntons will think twice about threatening someone the whole city is watching. It made sense, but also terrified her. Once the story was public, there would be no going back. No quiet settlement. No escape. It would be war. Okay, Emma said. Set it up. The article ran 4 days later, front page of the LA Times. Single mother inherits evidence of 75-year-old fraud. Faces lawsuit from wealthy family. The reporter had done her homework. She'd found records of the original fraud, tracked down descendants of victims, uncovered the suspicious death of Margaret Thornton. She'd interviewed Harrison about Arthur Chen's heroic choice to protect the bonds instead of spending them. And she'd painted Emma as a struggling single mother trying to do the right thing while being bullied by entitled aristocrats who wanted to bury their family's crimes. The story went viral. By that afternoon, it was trending on social media. News vans appeared outside Emma's house. Other outlets picked up the story. Modern David versus Goliath, the headlines read. Justice delayed 75 years. Can a single mom take down a corrupt dynasty? The public response was overwhelming. Thousands of people commented, shared, donated to a legal defense fund that Harrison had set up without asking Emma first. Within 48 hours, strangers had contributed $340,000 to help her fight. But there was a dark side, too. Emma's address was leaked online. People started showing up at her house. Some supporters, some critics, some just curious. Reporters camped on her lawn. Someone threw a brick through her window with a note attached. Thief. And Lily's school called. Miss Rodriguez, we need to talk about Lily's safety. We've had several people attempting to access the campus, asking to speak with her. We've turned them away, but we're concerned. Emma's blood ran cold. What people? One claimed to be doing a news story. Another said he was family. We verified neither was authorized. But Miss Rodriguez, this media attention is creating security issues. We may need to ask you to keep Lily home until things settle down. You're suspending my daughter because people are harassing her. We're trying to protect all our students. The situation is disruptive. Emma hung up, shaking with rage and fear. They were going after Lily, actually targeting her daughter to get to her. That night, she packed bags for both of them and moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. She enrolled Lily in a different school under a fake address. She changed her phone number. She stopped going to work. Her boss had fired her anyway after reporters kept calling the coffee shop. Emma Rodriguez was in hiding, living off donations from strangers, fighting a legal battle she didn't fully understand, all because her grandfather had tried to do the right thing 75 years ago. The temporary restraining order hearing was held in a courthouse in downtown LA. Emma sat next to Harrison at the defendant's table, trying not to shake. Across the aisle, the Thornton family had sent a team of 6 attorneys, all in expensive suits, all radiating confidence. The lead attorney, a woman named Victoria Thornton Hayes, was in her 50s with ice-cold eyes and the bearing of someone who'd never lost. She was the granddaughter of one of the firm's founders. This was personal for her. The judge was a gray-haired man in his 60s who looked tired before the hearing even started. All right, let's keep this simple. Ms. Thornton Hayes, you're seeking a temporary restraining order requiring the defendant to surrender certain securities to the court's custody pending resolution of ownership claims. Make your case. Victoria stood smoothly. Your Honor, this is straightforward. In 1947, Arthur Chen, the defendant's grandfather, stole bonds and certificates worth approximately $2 million from my family's investment firm. We have police reports documenting the theft, witness statements, corporate records showing the securities belong to our firm. Mr. Chen kept these stolen items for 75 years. Now he's dead, and his granddaughter has inherited stolen property. We're simply asking for the return of what was taken from us. She made it sound so reasonable, so simple, like Emma was a thief's accomplice refusing to return stolen goods. Harrison stood. Your Honor, I'd like to present some context that Ms. Thornton Hayes conveniently omitted. The theft she references was actually recovery of fraud proceeds. The Thornton investment firm was engaged in systematic fraud, selling worthless securities to elderly victims and pocketing their life savings. Arthur Chen attempted to report this fraud to authorities, but the Thorntons' political connections prevented any investigation. So Mr. Chen did the only thing he could. He took the bonds to protect them, to preserve them for eventual return to victims or their heirs. Victoria scoffed. That's a creative rewriting of history, but it's unsupported by evidence. Show me one victim. Show me one piece of proof that our firm engaged in fraud. Harrison pulled out a folder. Margaret Thornton, wife of the firm's founding partner. She committed suicide in 1947 after supposedly losing her fortune to the firm's investments. Except she didn't lose it. She was defrauded by her own husband's company. Here are her bank records showing $400,000 in deposits. And here are the worthless bonds she was sold in exchange. He handed copies to the judge. Here are 12 other victims, all elderly, all defrauded between 1945 and 1947. 6 of them died in poverty. The others lost their life savings. And, conveniently, all the police reports of their complaints disappeared from official records. But Arthur Chen kept copies. He documented everything. Victoria's face tightened. These are fabrications. Forgeries created to justify theft. Then why did your firm collapse in 1959? Why did 3 of its founders flee the country to avoid prosecution? Why have your family members spent 75 years quietly searching for these bonds instead of reporting them stolen to authorities? Harrison's voice rose. Because you know they're evidence. Evidence of crimes your family committed. Evidence Arthur Chen protected so that someday justice could be served. The judge held up a hand. Enough. I'm not going to resolve a 75-year-old fraud case in a TRO hearing. The question before me is narrow. Should these securities be held by the court pending trial? Your Honor, Victoria said smoothly, the defendant is a single mother with massive debts. She has every incentive to sell these bonds, flee with the proceeds, and make herself impossible to collect from if we prevail. The court needs to secure the property now. The defendant's financial situation is irrelevant, Harrison countered. She's not a flight risk. She's a lifelong California resident with a young daughter in school. And frankly, if the court seizes these bonds, there's a risk they'll be lost or accidentally destroyed before trial, just like all those police reports from 1947. The judge frowned. Are you accusing the court? I'm accusing the Thornton family of having resources and connections that could compromise the security of evidence. I'm asking that the bonds remain where Arthur Chen kept them safe for 75 years, in his granddaughter's custody, with the court's knowledge and oversight. The judge was quiet for a long moment. Then, here's my ruling. The securities will remain in Miss Rodriguez's custody for now, but she is ordered to provide the court with a complete inventory within 30 days. She may not sell, transfer, or otherwise dispose of any securities without court approval. Both parties will have access to authenticate and appraise the bonds in preparation for trial. And if I find any evidence that Miss Rodriguez has violated this order, I will hold her in contempt and seize the bonds immediately." "Understood." "Yes, Your Honor," Emma said quietly. They'd won. Barely, but they'd won. Victoria Thornton Hayes stared at Emma as they left the courtroom. Her expression was cold fury. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "You're going to regret this." "Is that a threat?" Harrison stepped between them. "Because if it is, we'll be adding harassment to our counterclaims." Victoria smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's a prediction. People who cross my family tend to have unfortunate accidents. Ask Margaret Thornton." "Oh, wait, you can't. She killed herself." "Allegedly." She walked away, her team of lawyers following like a flock of expensive birds. Harrison turned to Emma. "That was terrifying," Emma finished. "Yeah, that too." Over the next month, Emma lived in a state of constant vigilance. She moved 3 more times, never staying in one motel longer than a week. She kept Lily out of school, teaching her at home using library books and online resources. She barely slept, jumping at every noise, checking locks obsessively, convinced someone was coming for the bonds, or worse, coming for Lily to force her to surrender them. The authentication process began. Court-appointed experts examined the bonds in the wardrobe's hidden compartment. They photographed everything, cataloged serial numbers, verified signatures and dates. The complete inventory was staggering. 347 government bonds ranging from $1,000 to $100,000 face value. 892 corporate bonds and securities from 73 different companies. 156 municipal bonds from 31 different cities and counties. Total estimated value, $203.4 million. Some bonds were worth less than face value, companies that had gone bankrupt or been absorbed, but others were worth exponentially more. An early IBM certificate purchase for $5,000 was now worth $4.2 million. AT&T bonds had split and compounded over decades into a portfolio worth $12 million. General Electric stock certificates were valued at $8.7 million. The victims' descendants were located. 12 families, some of whom had never known their grandparents had been defrauded. They joined the lawsuit, filing claims against the Thornton estate for restitution. The case grew more complex. Now it wasn't just Emma versus the Thorntons. It was a 3-way fight. Emma claiming inheritance rights, the Thorntons claiming ownership of stolen property, and the victims' families claiming the bonds as restitution for fraud. The media loved it. The story dominated headlines for weeks. Emma became a symbol. To some, a hero standing up to corrupt elites. To others, an opportunistic thief trying to profit from stolen goods. She received death threats and marriage proposals in equal measure. Strangers recognized her in grocery stores, some offering support, others cursing her out. It was exhausting and terrifying and surreal. And through it all, Emma kept thinking about her grandfather. About Arthur Chen, who'd carried this burden for 75 years in silence, never seeking recognition or reward, simply doing what he believed was right. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered to his memory one night, sitting alone in yet another motel room. "Why didn't you prepare me for this?" But she knew the answer. He'd been protecting her. If she'd known about the bonds, she would have been a target while he was still alive. Better for her to discover them after. Better for her to make her own choice about what to do. He'd trusted her to do the right thing. And she was trying. God, she was trying. But it was so hard. So much harder than she'd ever imagined. The trial date was set for 8 months out. 8 months of living in hiding, of legal battles, of watching every penny while sitting on a fortune she couldn't touch. 8 months of wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. "Mama," Lily said one night as Emma tucked her into the motel bed. "When can we go home?" "Soon, baby. Soon." But Emma didn't know if that was true. She didn't know if they'd ever have a real home again, or if this fight would consume everything. Their safety, their sanity, their lives. All she knew was that she couldn't quit now. Too many people were counting on her. The victims' families who deserved justice. The public who'd rallied behind her story. Her grandfather who'd trusted her with his life's work. And Lily, who needed to see that sometimes the right thing was worth fighting for, even when the cost was everything you had. Emma lay awake listening to her daughter breathe, and she made a promise. She would see this through. Whatever it took, however long it lasted, whatever the cost. She would fight. For justice. For truth. For the legacy her grandfather had left her. Not wealth, but the courage to stand against corruption, even when the whole world told her to surrender. That courage was the real inheritance. And Emma Rodriguez would prove herself worthy of it. The weeks leading up to trial were a blur of depositions, document reviews, and mounting pressure. Emma sat in Harrison's office. He'd given her a spare room to use as a temporary workspace, surrounded by boxes of evidence. Court transcripts, police reports from 1947, corporate records, bank statements, witness testimonies. Every piece of paper told part of a story that spanned 75 years. A story of fraud, theft, murder, and one man's quiet determination to preserve evidence that powerful people wanted destroyed. "The Thorntons are offering a settlement," Harrison said, walking in with a folder. He looked exhausted. The case had consumed him as much as it had consumed Emma. "How much?" Emma asked, though she already knew she wouldn't take it. $15 million. Plus they drop all criminal claims against your grandfather's estate. You walk away clean, they get the bonds, the victims' families get nothing. Emma laughed bitterly. $15 million out of $203 million. Less than 8%. It's more than you had 3 months ago. It's enough to secure Lily's future, buy a house, live comfortably. You could take it and disappear, Emma. Start over somewhere no one knows your story. Is that what you think I should do? Harrison sat down heavily. I think you're one person fighting an empire. I think the Thorntons have unlimited resources and you're living in motels. I think this trial could drag on for years. And even if we win, they'll appeal and appeal again and tie everything up in courts until you're bankrupted or broken. I think, he paused, I think your grandfather might understand if you chose survival over principle. Emma looked at the boxes surrounding her. Each one represented lives destroyed by the Thorntons' fraud. Margaret Thornton, driven to suicide, or murdered and made to look like suicide. Thomas and Marie Kowalski, who'd lost their hardware store and died in poverty. The Chen family, no relation to her grandfather, who'd lost 3 generations of savings. 12 families, dozens of people whose lives had been ruined. What about them? Emma pointed to the files. What about the victims' families? They've been waiting 75 years for justice. If I settle, they get nothing. The Thorntons win again. The guilty go unpunished. And the message is clear. If you're wealthy enough, connected enough, you can commit any crime and get away with it. Emma, my grandfather could have spent this money. He could have lived like a king. He was 22 years old with $2 million in bonds when most people were making $50 a week. He could have gone anywhere, done anything. But he didn't. He worked at the post office for 40 years. He lived in modest houses. He drove used cars. He gave up everything, so these bonds would be here when justice finally became possible. Her voice broke. I can't betray that. I can't take their blood money and pretend it's okay because it solves my problems. That's exactly what they're counting on, that I'm desperate enough to sell out. Harrison nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say that, because I agree. But I needed you to make the choice yourself, without me pushing. This is going to get worse before it gets better, Emma. Are you prepared for that? No, but I'm doing it anyway. The settlement offer was rejected. The Thorntons responded by escalating their tactics. Private investigators began following Emma everywhere. They photographed her, documented her movements, looking for any mistake they could use against her. They interviewed everyone she'd ever known, old employers, former friends, Lily's teachers, asking questions designed to make Emma look unstable, irresponsible, unfit. They dug into her past, found the DUI from when she was 19, found records of the eviction from 4 years ago, found every late payment, every bounced check, every financial mistake she'd ever made. They painted a picture of a woman who was desperate, reckless, and opportunistic, someone who'd exploit her grandfather's death for profit. Emma knew what they were doing because Harrison's investigators were doing the same thing to them. And what they found was damning. The Thornton family had been engaged in financial fraud for 3 generations. The original firm from the 1940s had collapsed in scandal. Yes, but the family had simply reformed under different names. New companies, same practices. They'd been sued dozens of times over the decades. They'd settled cases quietly, paid fines without admitting guilt, made problems disappear with money and connections. They had relationships with judges, prosecutors, politicians. They donated to campaigns, sat on boards, controlled foundations. They were what old money looked like when it had been built on crime and maintained through corruption. And they were very, very good at making enemies disappear. Harrison showed Emma a file one afternoon. Margaret Thornton wasn't the only suspicious death connected to this family. There have been 7 others over the years. Whistleblowers, investigators, journalists who got too close. All ruled accidents or suicides. All conveniently timed. All impossible to prove were murders. Emma's blood ran cold. You think they'd. I think they have before, and they would again if they thought they could get away with it. Which is why you need to be extremely careful. Vary your route. Check your car before driving. Don't eat or drink anything that could be tampered with. Watch Lily constantly. This is insane. This is America in the 21st century. People don't just get murdered by wealthy families. Don't they? Harrison's expression was grim. How many billionaires have you seen go to prison? How many powerful people actually face consequences? The system protects them, Emma. It always has. Your grandfather understood that. That's why he hid the bonds instead of trying to expose the fraud through official channels. He knew the system was rigged. That night, Emma couldn't sleep again. She lay in the dark motel room, listening to Lily breathe, thinking about Margaret Thornton, about whether she'd really killed herself or whether someone had pushed her, about whether the same fate awaited Emma if she pushed too hard. She thought about taking the settlement. $15 million was still life-changing money. She could invest it, live off the interest, never work again. She could send Lily to any college. They could travel, experience things Emma had only dreamed of. They could be safe. But then she thought about facing Lily in 10 years, 20 years, and explaining why she'd given up. Explaining why she'd let the bad guys win. Explaining why $15 million was enough to sell out her grandfather's legacy and the victims who'd been waiting decades for justice. She couldn't do it, even though the smart play was to settle. Even though staying in the fight might get her killed. She couldn't do it. The trial began on a cold Monday in February. The courthouse was packed. Media, spectators, representatives from victims' families, law students studying the case. Emma wore a simple dress Harrison had bought her. Nothing too expensive, nothing that would make her look like she was already spending the money she claimed she didn't have. The Thorntons arrived in a fleet of black cars. Victoria Thornton Hayes led the family contingent. Herself, her 2 brothers, various cousins, and relatives. They all looked polished, powerful, certain of victory. Old money radiating confidence that came from never having lost anything that mattered. The judge was a woman in her early 50s, Judge Maria Santos. Harrison had said she was fair, but by the book. She wouldn't be swayed by emotion or media attention. She'd follow the law strictly, which was good and bad. Good because the Thorntons couldn't buy her, bad because the law wasn't always just. All rise, the bailiff called. The trial that would determine Emma's future and the fates of 12 families seeking justice had begun. Victoria Thornton Hayes gave the opening statement for the plaintiffs. She was polished, articulate, devastating. This is a case about theft, she began, making eye contact with the jury. Pure and simple theft. In 1947, a man named Arthur Chen worked briefly as a clerk for an investment firm. He had access to the company vault, and one night, he stole bonds and securities worth millions of dollars. He kept them hidden for 75 years, and when he died, his granddaughter inherited the stolen property. She gestured to Emma. The defendant would have you believe this was some noble act, that my family's firm was fraudulent, that Arthur Chen was a hero protecting evidence. But where's the proof? Where are the police reports? Where are the criminal charges? Where are the victims? Victoria walked to a display board. Here's what we can prove. These are police reports from 1947 documenting the theft. These are witness statements from employees who saw Arthur Chen in the vault on the night the bonds disappeared. These are corporate records showing the bonds belong to our firm. And here, she pointed to another document, is Arthur Chen's own confession, written in 1948, admitting he took the bonds. Emma's heart stopped. Confession? What confession? Harrison was on his feet immediately. Objection, Your Honor. We've never seen this alleged confession. It wasn't produced in discovery. Victoria smiled. It was in a safe deposit box that just came to light last month. We produced it immediately upon finding it. The defense has had 3 weeks to review it. 3 weeks? Harrison's voice rose. Your Honor, this is a 75-year-old document that conveniently appears right before trial. The timing is suspicious at best, and the authentication is questionable. We have handwriting experts ready to testify, Victoria said smoothly. The confession is genuine, and it proves definitively that Arthur Chen stole these bonds. Everything else is just noise designed to distract from that simple fact. Judge Santos frowned. I'll allow it for now, pending authentication testimony. But Ms. Thornton Hayes, any more surprise documents, and I'll consider sanctions. Emma leaned toward Harrison. What confession? My grandfather never. It's fake, Harrison whispered. Has to be, but we'll need to prove it. Stay calm. Victoria continued her opening statement, painting Arthur Chen as a thief who'd craftily hidden his crime behind false accusations of fraud. She painted Emma as an opportunist trying to profit from her grandfather's theft. She made the whole case sound simple, straightforward, obvious. When she finished, the jury looked convinced. Emma felt sick. Then Harrison stood for the defense's opening statement. He walked slowly to the jury box, letting the silence stretch. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but intense. Victoria Thornton Hayes just told you a story. A simple story about theft and lies. But like most simple stories told by powerful people, it leaves out the truth. So let me tell you what really happened. He walked to his own display board. In 1945, the Thornton investment firm began targeting elderly clients, widows, retirees, people who'd saved their whole lives. The firm would gain their trust, then sell them worthless bonds, fake securities from companies that didn't exist or had already gone bankrupt. The firm would pocket the money and destroy the evidence. Harrison pointed to photographs. Margaret Thornton, Thomas and Marie Kowalski, the Chen family, 12 families total. They lost everything. And when Margaret Thornton threatened to go public, she died. The official story was suicide. But Arthur Chen believed otherwise. Arthur worked at the firm for just 3 months. But in those 3 months, he saw what was happening. He documented it. He copied records. And he planned to go to the authorities. But before he could, Margaret Thornton died. And Arthur realized the authorities wouldn't help because the Thorntons owned them. Harrison's voice grew stronger. So Arthur did the only thing he could. He took the bonds, not to keep them, but to protect them, to make sure they couldn't be destroyed, to preserve evidence that someday, when the Thorntons no longer controlled every judge and police officer in San Francisco, justice might finally be possible. He turned to face the jury directly. Arthur Chen spent 75 years guarding those bonds. He could have sold them, spent them, lived like a king. Instead, he worked as a postal clerk until he was 80 years old. He lived modestly. He gave up wealth, comfort, security, all to protect evidence of crimes the Thorntons want buried. And now his granddaughter, Emma Rodriguez, is doing what Arthur couldn't do in his lifetime, bringing the truth to light, giving the victims' families their day in court, making the Thorntons answer for what they did. Harrison paused. Ms. Thornton Hayes showed you documents claiming Arthur Chen confessed to theft. We'll prove those documents are forgeries, manufactured by a family desperate to avoid accountability. She showed you police reports. We'll show you why those reports were false, filed by corrupt officers on the Thornton payroll. This case isn't about theft. It's about justice delayed 75 years. It's about whether the wealthy and powerful can commit crimes with impunity or whether the truth eventually matters. And at the end of this trial, We'll ask you to do what authorities in 1947 failed to do: hold the Thorntons accountable. When Harrison sat down, the jury looked uncertain. The case suddenly wasn't simple anymore. It was complicated, murky, a tangle of competing narratives spanning 3/4 of a century, which was exactly what Harrison wanted. If the jury was confused, they might rule in Emma's favor. If they thought the Thorntons were probably guilty of something, they might let Emma keep the bonds. It was a long shot, but it was a shot. The trial proceeded over the following weeks. The Thorntons called witness after witness. Elderly former employees of the firm who testified Arthur Chen had been seen near the vault, had acted suspiciously, had been fired for cause. They called handwriting experts who swore the confession letter was authentic. They called financial experts who testified the bonds had always belonged to the firm, that there was no evidence of fraud, that the Thorntons had operated a legitimate business. Harrison cross-examined each witness brutally. He got the former employees to admit they'd been paid consulting fees by the Thornton family for the last 30 years, essentially lifetime payouts for loyalty. He got the handwriting experts to admit their analysis was inconclusive, that documents from 75 years ago were extremely difficult to authenticate definitively. He got the financial experts to acknowledge that records from the 1940s were incomplete, that many documents had been lost or destroyed in a fire, that it was impossible to verify what securities the firm had legitimately owned versus what they'd obtained through fraud. Then Harrison called the defense witnesses. Descendants of the fraud victims testified about how their grandparents had lost everything. They brought photos, letters, documents showing their families had been destroyed by the Thornton scheme. One woman, Janet Kowalski, testified about her grandparents' hardware store. They saved for 30 years to buy that store. It was their dream. Then a man from the Thornton firm convinced them to invest in bonds he said were guaranteed to triple in value. They sold the store, gave him everything, $47,000. Within a year, the bonds were worthless. My grandmother died of a heart attack from the stress. My grandfather drank himself to death. My father grew up in poverty, and our family never recovered. She looked directly at Victoria Thornton Hayes. Your family did that. Your grandfather and his partners. They stole from desperate people and called it business. And you have the audacity to sit here and claim you're the victims? Victoria's face remained impassive, but Emma saw her jaw clench. Harrison called forensic document examiners who testified that the confession letter showed signs of forgery. The paper was authentic to the period, but the ink contained compounds not available until the 1960s. The Thorntons had fabricated it, probably decades ago, in anticipation of this fight. He called historians who explained the culture of corruption in post-war San Francisco, how powerful families control politics and law enforcement, how fraud against the elderly was common and rarely prosecuted. And finally, he put Emma on the stand. Victoria Thornton Hayes cross-examined her viciously. Miss Rodriguez, you were facing eviction when your grandfather died, correct? Yes. You owed $47,000 in medical bills. Yes. Your car had been repossessed? Yes. And then, conveniently, you discovered bonds worth $203 million hidden in your grandfather's wardrobe? Emma met Victoria's eyes. It wasn't convenient. It was devastating, because I realized my grandfather had spent his entire life protecting evidence that powerful people wanted destroyed. And now that burden had fallen to me, where you saw an opportunity to solve all your financial problems by claiming stolen property. If I'd wanted to solve my financial problems, I would have taken your settlement offer. I would have walked away with $15 million and disappeared. Instead, I'm here, fighting to make sure the victims' families get justice. Fighting to expose what your family did. Victoria's smile was cold. How noble. Or is it that you think you can get more than $15 million if you win? I think some things are worth more than money. My grandfather believed that. I believe it too. Convenient morality from someone who was broke 3 months ago. Harrison objected. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Santos said. Ms. Thornton Hayes, ask questions, don't editor mails. The cross-examination continued for hours. Victoria tried to portray Emma as greedy, desperate, willing to lie about the Thornton family to justify keeping stolen bonds. Emma held her ground, refusing to be rattled, answering calmly, even as Victoria's questions became increasingly hostile. When Emma finally stepped down, she felt wrung out, exhausted. But she also felt something else, proud. She'd stood up to Victoria Thorntonhayes. She'd told the truth, and she'd done her grandfather's memory justice. The closing arguments came 2 weeks later, after dozens of witnesses and hundreds of exhibits. Victoria Thorntonhayes spoke first, summarizing her case with prosecutorial precision. Arthur Chen had stolen bonds. The confession proved it. The witnesses confirmed it. The defense's claims of fraud were unsupported conspiracy theories. Emma Rodriguez was trying to profit from her grandfather's crime. The jury should return the bonds to their rightful owners, the Thornton family. Then Harrison stood. He spoke for nearly 2 hours, walking the jury through the evidence piece by piece. The fraud victims, the suspicious death of Margaret Thornton, the forged confession letter, the corrupt police reports, the pattern of the Thornton family buying their way out of trouble for 3 generations. He ended with Arthur Chen's story, a 22-year-old postal clerk who saw injustice and decided to do something about it, even though it cost him everything. He could have been rich. He chose to be righteous. He could have ignored what he'd seen. He chose to act. And for 75 years, he carried the burden alone, waiting for a time when justice might finally be possible. Harrison turned to Emma. Now that burden has fallen to his granddaughter, a single mother who was struggling to survive, who could have taken an easy payday and walked away. Instead, she chose to fight, to expose the truth, to give the victims' families what they've waited 75 years for, acknowledgement that what happened to them was wrong, that the Thorntons are guilty, that justice, no matter how delayed, still matters. He faced the jury. The Thorntons want you to believe this is a simple case about stolen property. But it's not. It's about whether wealth grants immunity from consequences. It's about whether the powerful can commit crimes and have their grandchildren inherit the proceeds without question. It's about whether justice exists for people like the Kowalskis, like Margaret Thornton, like Arthur Chen, ordinary people who dared to challenge the corrupt elite. Arthur Chen bet his entire life on the belief that truth eventually wins, that justice eventually comes, that ordinary people, if they're brave enough, can stand against corruption and prevail. He's gone now, but his granddaughter is here carrying on his fight, and she's asking you, begging you, to prove that bet wasn't in vain. Rule for Emma Rodriguez. Rule for the victims' families. Rule that the Thorntons must finally answer for what they did. Rule that after 75 years, justice has come at last. The jury deliberated for 3 days. 3 days during which Emma barely ate, barely slept, barely functioned. She sat in the courthouse hallway, waiting, praying, terrified of what would happen if they lost. Lily was with Jenna, safe, unaware of how close they were to losing everything. Emma had decided not to bring her to court. Whatever happened, she wanted to shield her daughter from it as long as possible. On the 3rd day, the jury sent word they had reached a verdict. Emma and Harrison returned to the courtroom. The Thorntons filed in, confident as ever. The victims' families filled the gallery, holding hands, barely breathing. Judge Santos entered. Everyone rose. Everyone sat. The foreman handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. Judge Santos read it, her expression revealing nothing. The jury has reached a verdict. I'll now read it into the record. She looked at Emma. On the question of ownership of the securities currently in the defendant's possession, the jury finds in favor of the defendant, Emma Rodriguez. Emma's ears rang. She couldn't breathe. They'd won. They'd actually won. The courtroom erupted. The victims' families wept and embraced. Reporters ran for the exits to file stories. The Thorntons sat in stunned silence, Victoria's face white with fury. Judge Santos banged her gavel. Order. Order in this court. The noise subsided. The jury has ruled that the bonds and securities found in Arthur Chen's possession are not stolen property, but rather evidence of fraud, recovered and protected by Mr. Chen. As such, they belong to his estate, currently represented by his granddaughter and heir, Emma Rodriguez. However, the judge continued, and Emma's joy faltered. The jury has also found that the bonds were originally purchased with money obtained through fraud against the plaintiffs' families. Therefore, the court orders that 40% of the total value of the securities be paid to the 12 victim families as restitution for the fraud perpetrated against their ancestors. 40%. Emma did the math quickly. $203 million times 40% was roughly $81 million, which left her with $122 million. Still a fortune, more than she'd ever dreamed of, but shared with the people who deserved it. The people her grandfather had protected for 75 years. She started crying, not from disappointment, from relief, from justice, from the overwhelming weight of what her grandfather had done finally being acknowledged. Furthermore, Judge Santos said, the court finds that the Thornton family engaged in systematic fraud in the 1940s and 50s, and that their attempts to reclaim these bonds constituted an effort to conceal evidence of that fraud. As such, all claims by the Thornton family are dismissed with prejudice. They are ordered to pay the defendants' legal fees in full. Victoria Thornton Hayes was on her feet. Your Honor, we will appeal. You're welcome to appeal, Ms. Thornton Hayes. But I'm advising you now that the evidence presented in this trial is sufficient to warrant a referral to federal prosecutors. I'm ordering a complete investigation into your family's financial dealings, both historical and current. If fraud is found, criminal charges may follow. You may want to consider that before deciding whether to continue this fight. Victoria's face went from white to red. She gathered her papers and stormed out, her team of lawyers scrambling to follow. The courtroom buzzed with conversation. Harrison hugged Emma tightly. We did it, he whispered. We actually did it. Emma couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. The aftermath of the trial was chaotic. The verdict made national news. Emma became a household name, the single mother who'd taken on a corrupt dynasty and won. Book deals and movie offers poured in. Financial advisors called wanting to help her invest. Journalists requested interviews. But Emma just wanted to go home. Except she didn't have a home. She'd been living in motels for months. Her grandfather's house was still in foreclosure. Her own apartment was long gone. She was suddenly worth $122 million, but she had nowhere to live. Harrison helped her find a temporary rental, a small house in a quiet neighborhood where she and Lily could finally feel safe. Emma enrolled Lily back in regular school. She bought a reliable car, nothing fancy, just something that wouldn't break down. She paid off her medical bills and debts. And then she started working on the harder part, figuring out what to do with the rest. The victim families received their restitution over the following months. Emma attended the distribution hearing, watching as 12 families finally received compensation for what had been stolen from them 75 years ago. Janet Kowalski wept when she received the check, $6.2 million, representing her grandparents' lost store plus interest and inflation adjustments. This doesn't bring them back, Janet said, hugging Emma, but it means they mattered. It means what happened to them wasn't forgotten. Thank you. Thank you, grandfather. He gave us something we thought we'd never have, justice. Emma set up a foundation in Arthur Chen's name, dedicated to exposing financial fraud and helping victims of white-collar crime. She donated $10 million to start it, hired staff, created programs. It wasn't about the money. It was about honoring her grandfather's legacy, turning his 75-year fight into something that would help others. She bought her grandfather's house back from the bank, paid cash, and had it restored. She kept the wardrobe, of course, kept it in her bedroom, where she could see it every day. The hidden compartment was empty now, but she couldn't bring herself to remove the false panel. It was part of the story, part of what her grandfather had built. She established college funds for Lily and scholarships for other single parents trying to finish their education. She invested the rest conservatively, living off interest, never forgetting what it felt like to count pennies for milk and bread. And slowly, life became normal again. Or, as normal as it could be for someone who'd gone from broke to worth over $100 million in 6 months. The Thorntons appealed, as expected. The appeals court upheld the verdict. They appealed again to the state Supreme Court. The court declined to hear the case. After 2 years of legal wrangling, it was finally definitively over. The bonds belonged to Emma. The Thorntons had lost. Better still, the federal investigation Judge Santos had ordered bore fruit. Prosecutors found evidence of ongoing fraud in the Thorntons' current investment firms. Nothing as blatant as the 1940 scheme, but enough securities violations to warrant charges. Victoria Thornton Hayes was indicted on multiple counts. Her brothers faced civil penalties. The family's empire began to crumble. Emma watched it happen with grim satisfaction, not because she enjoyed their suffering, but because it proved something important. The guilty eventually face consequences. Maybe not immediately, maybe not for decades, but eventually, if enough good people refuse to quit fighting, justice wins. 3 years after finding the bonds, Emma stood in her grandfather's restored house, looking at a photograph of him on the mantel. He was young in the picture, maybe 25, wearing a postal worker's uniform and smiling at the camera. He looked happy, unburdened. This was before he'd found the bonds, before he'd spent 75 years carrying a secret that weighed on him every day. "I hope I made you proud, Grandpa," Emma whispered. She thought he would be proud. She'd done what he'd done, chosen principle over profit, justice over personal gain. She'd fought when the smart move was to settle. She'd exposed the truth when silence would have been easier. She'd honored the legacy he'd left her. And now, she was using the fortune to help others, to fight fraud, to support victims, to make sure what happened to the Kowalskis and Margaret Thornton and all the others wouldn't be forgotten. Lily came running in, now 13 years old, tall and healthy and thriving. "Mom, Jenna's here. We're going to the movies." Emma smiled. "Have fun, baby. Be back by 9. "I will. Love you." Lily kissed her cheek and ran out. Emma stood in the quiet house, feeling peaceful for the first time in years. They were safe. They were secure. And more importantly, they were living proof that ordinary people could stand against corruption and win. It had cost her months of fear, stress, danger. It had cost her grandfather even more, 75 years of hiding, working, sacrificing. But it had been worth it. Every terrifying moment, every sleepless night, every threat and lawsuit and fight. Worth it. Because justice mattered. Because truth mattered. Because some things, integrity, principle, honor, were worth more than any fortune. Her grandfather had taught her that, and she would teach it to Lily, and Lily would teach it to her own children someday. The lesson would carry forward generation after generation, proof that good people could make a difference if they refused to give up. Emma touched the photograph gently. "Thank you, Grandpa, for everything." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Emma walked to the window and looked out at the street where she'd grown up, where her grandfather had lived his quiet, humble life while protecting a secret that could have made him rich but instead made him righteous. She thought about the wardrobe upstairs, about the hidden compartment that had held $203 million and evidence of crimes. She thought about the moment she discovered it, how her whole life had changed in an instant, how finding that money had seemed like a miracle until she'd learned the truth about where it came from and what it represented. The real miracle hadn't been finding the fortune. It had been having the strength to fight for it properly, to share it with those who'd been wronged, to honor her grandfather's sacrifice by being worthy of it. Emma Rodriguez had inherited $203 million, yes. But more than that, she'd inherited a legacy of courage. And that legacy, the knowledge that she'd stood against corruption and won, that she'd honored her grandfather's memory, that she'd given justice to families who'd waited 75 years, was worth more than any amount of money. She stood at the window as darkness fell, feeling her grandfather's presence somehow, like he was there beside her, proud and at peace. The fight was over. The bonds were hers. The victims had been compensated. The guilty had been exposed. After 75 years, Arthur Chen's mission was complete. And Emma? She was just beginning to understand what it meant to be his granddaughter, to carry his name and his values forward, to use the fortune not as a prize, but as a responsibility, to make sure the next generation learned that sometimes The most valuable thing you can inherit isn't wealth. It's the courage to do what's right, no matter the cost. The wardrobe stood upstairs, empty now, but still holding its secrets in the wood grain and hidden hinges. A testament to one man's determination to protect the truth. A reminder that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. A legacy of principle over profit. And Emma stood in the house her grandfather had loved, with a daughter sleeping safely upstairs and a future finally secure, knowing she'd been worthy of the inheritance. Not the money, the mission. The fight for justice that her grandfather had started and she had finished. Together, separated by death, but united in purpose, they had proven that the truth mattered. That justice, no matter how delayed, eventually came. That ordinary people with extraordinary courage could change the world. Arthur Chen's wardrobe had held $203 million. But the real treasure was what he'd taught his granddaughter. That some things are worth fighting for, even when the whole world tells you to surrender. And Emma would spend the rest of her life proving that lesson true. 5 years after the trial, Emma stood in the boardroom of the Arthur Chen Foundation, looking out at the city skyline. The foundation occupied the entire 15th floor of a renovated building downtown, a far cry from the motels and borrowed office space where this journey had begun. Miss Rodriguez, her assistant, Marcus, poked his head in. The documentary crew is here. They're setting up in the conference room. Emma nodded. Give me 5 minutes. She'd resisted telling her story publicly for years. Too raw, too personal, too painful to revisit. But now, with distance and perspective, she'd agreed to participate in a documentary about financial fraud and the ordinary people who fought back against it. Not for fame or attention, but because other victims needed to know they weren't alone. That fighting back was possible. The documentary director was a woman in her 40s named Arthur Chen. No relation to Arthur, but the shared surname had created an instant connection. Sarah had spent 2 years researching the case, interviewing everyone involved, tracking down details that even Emma hadn't known. Thank you for doing this, Sarah said as Emma sat down in front of the cameras. I know it's not easy. Nothing about this has been easy, Emma replied. But that doesn't mean it wasn't worth it. The interview lasted 3 hours. Sarah asked about everything: the discovery of the bonds, the decision to fight, the threats and fear, the trial, the aftermath. Emma answered honestly, holding nothing back. She talked about the nights she'd been terrified for Lily's safety, the moments she'd wanted to quit, the weight of knowing that losing meant betraying everyone who'd believed in her. What would you say to your grandfather if you could talk to him now? Sarah asked near the end. Emma was quiet for a long moment. I'd ask him why he didn't tell me, why he carried that burden alone for so long. But I think I know the answer. He was protecting me. If I'd known while he was alive, I would have been a target. Better for me to find out after, when I could make my own choice. And what choice did you make? The same one he did. To fight for what was right, even when it cost everything. Even when the smart move was to walk away. Emma smiled sadly. I used to think that was stubborn. Now, I think it's the only way to live with yourself. After the interview, Emma met with the foundation staff to review their cases. They were helping 43 victims of financial fraud currently. People who'd been scammed by investment schemes, Ponzi operations, predatory lenders. The foundation paid for legal representation, connected victims with resources, and advocated for stronger consumer protections. It was the work Arthur would have done if he'd lived to see the bonds return to their rightful purpose. Emma was doing it for him, and for every person who'd been victimized by people who thought wealth made them untouchable. We got another inquiry, Marcus said, handing her a file. Elderly woman in Sacramento who lost $300,000 to a financial advisor who promised guaranteed returns. Classic affinity fraud. The advisor went to her church, gained her trust. Emma scanned the file, anger rising in her chest. This was exactly the kind of predator her grandfather had fought against. Take the case. Find her the best lawyers. And see if we can track down other victims. These people never stop at one. Already on it. We've identified at least 6 other church members who were targeted. Good. Let's shut this down before more people get hurt. This was the part of her inheritance Emma valued most. Not the money itself, but what she could do with it. Every case they took, every victim they helped, was a continuation of Arthur's mission. Justice might be slow, but it was relentless if enough people refused to give up. That evening, Emma drove to Lily's high school to pick her up from debate team practice. Her daughter was 16 now, confident and articulate in ways that made Emma's heart swell with pride. Lily had chosen to be open about their story, using it as fuel for her activism. She gave speeches about economic justice, volunteered with legal aid organizations, and had already been accepted to Stanford with plans to study law. "How was practice?" Emma asked as Lily climbed into the car. "Good. We're preparing for the state championship. The topic is about corporate accountability and criminal justice reform." Lily grinned. "I might have some personal experience to draw on." Emma laughed. "Just a bit." They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lily said, "Mom, I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "The Thorntons. Victoria Thornton Hayes got sentenced today. 3 years in federal prison for securities fraud. I saw it on the news." Emma had seen it too. The woman who tried to destroy them was finally facing consequences. Not for what her family had done in the 1940s. Those crimes were too old to prosecute, but for continuing the pattern. For believing she was above the law. For thinking wealth granted immunity. "How do you feel about it?" Emma asked carefully. Lily was quiet, thinking, "I feel like justice is messy. Like even when you win, it doesn't fix everything. Those people her family hurt in the 40s, most of them are dead. Their families got money, which helps, but it doesn't give them back what they lost. Margaret Thornton is still dead. The Kowalskis still grew up poor. Great-grandpa Arthur still spent his whole life hiding." "You're right," Emma said. "Justice doesn't undo harm. It can only try to prevent future harm and acknowledge what happened. But it's still worth fighting for." "Yes, it's still worth fighting for." They pulled into the driveway of their house, a modest 4-bedroom in a good neighborhood. Emma had bought it 2 years ago, choosing something comfortable but not ostentatious. She'd seen what wealth did to people who let it define them. She'd seen the Thorntons' arrogance, their belief that money made them special. She never wanted to become that. Inside, Emma started making dinner while Lily did homework at the kitchen table. This was the life she'd dreamed of during those desperate months. Normal evenings, a safe home, her daughter thriving. The money had made it possible, but it wasn't what made it meaningful. Her phone rang. Harrison Webb. She answered immediately. "Emma, I wanted to give you a heads up. The appeals court just ruled on the Thornton family civil suit. The one where they were trying to recover damages from you for defamation." Emma's stomach tightened. This lawsuit had been hanging over her for 2 years. Victoria's final attempt to hurt her, filed just before the criminal charges came down. And dismissed with prejudice. The court found that everything you said about the Thorntons was factually accurate and protected speech. They're also ordering the Thorntons to pay your legal fees, about $400,000. Emma sat down heavily. "It's really over? All of it? All of it? No more appeals, no more lawsuits, no more threats. The Thorntons are done. Their reputation is destroyed, their finances are in shambles, and Victoria will be disbarred after a prison sentence. They can't hurt you anymore." After she hung up, Emma just sat there, letting it sink in. 7 years. 7 years since she'd found the bonds. 7 years of fighting, fear, stress, uncertainty. And now was finally, definitively over. Lily looked up from her homework. "Good news. The best. The last lawsuit is dismissed. The Thorntons have no more legal options. We're free." Lily came over and hugged her mother tightly. Great-grandpa would be proud. "Yeah," Emma whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "I think he would be." The next morning, Emma drove to the cemetery where Arthur was buried. She visited regularly, usually on his birthday and the anniversary of his death. But today felt significant enough to warrant a special trip. She sat on the grass beside his headstone, which read simply, "Arthur Chen, 1925 to 2018, beloved grandfather." She wanted to add more, something about his courage, his sacrifice, his 75-year mission. But Arthur had lived a quiet life. He probably wouldn't have wanted a flashy memorial. "It's over, Grandpa," she said aloud. "All the lawsuits, all the fighting. The Thorntons lost everything. The victims' families got justice. The foundation is helping people every day. You did it. You actually did it. A breeze rustled through the trees overhead. Emma pulled out her phone and showed him a photo, even though he couldn't see it. This is Lily at her debate tournament last month. She won first place arguing about corporate accountability. She's so smart, Grandpa. So strong. She's going to change the world, I think. And she knows about you. She knows what you did, what you sacrificed. She knows the story of the wardrobe and the bonds and the choice you made to protect them. Emma's voice cracked. I wish you could have seen this. Wish you could have met her as a teenager, seen who she's becoming. Wish you could have been there when we won. Wish I could have thanked you properly. She wiped her eyes. But I'm doing what you would have wanted. I'm using the money to help people. I'm teaching Lily that integrity matters more than wealth. I'm making sure your story is told so other people understand that one person really can make a difference. Emma stood, placing flowers on a grave. Rest well, Grandpa. Your fight is finished. And you won. As she walked back to her car, Emma thought about legacy. What did it mean to leave something behind? The Thorntons had left wealth, but also corruption and crime. Their family name was now synonymous with fraud and arrogance. That was their legacy. Arthur Chen had left much less money. He died with only $40,000 in savings. But he'd left something more valuable, proof that ordinary people could stand against injustice. That courage didn't require wealth or power. That one person's refusal to be complicit could ripple forward through generations. Emma was determined to honor that legacy. Not by being perfect, she made mistakes, had doubts, struggled sometimes with the weight of responsibility. But by trying, by choosing the harder right over the easier wrong, by teaching Lily the same lessons Arthur had taught her, even if he'd had to teach them posthumously. The documentary premiered 6 months later at a film festival in New York. Emma and Lily attended, sitting in a packed theater watching their story unfold on screen. Sarah had done beautiful work, interviewing the victims' families, the lawyers, even tracking down some of the Thorntons' former employees who admitted they'd known about the fraud but been too scared to speak up. The film ended with Emma's final interview comments. My grandfather taught me that some things are worth more than money, worth more than safety, worth more than anything. Integrity, truth, justice. Those things define who we are in ways that wealth never can. And if we lose sight of that, if we decide that money is more important than doing what's right, then we've lost everything that actually matters. The theater erupted in applause. People stood, some crying. Emma felt Lily squeeze her hand. After the screening, dozens of people approached Emma. Some were fraud victims themselves, thanking her for showing that fighting back was possible. Others were just moved by the story, by Arthur's sacrifice and Emma's courage. Several were journalists asking about the foundation, about how people could help. One woman, elderly and dignified, waited until the crowd thinned. She approached Emma with tears in her eyes. Miss Rodriguez, my name is Catherine Morrison. My mother was Claire Morrison. Emma's breath caught. Claire Morrison, the woman from the letters. The one who'd had an affair with one of the Thornton partners. The one who'd fled town in fear and guilt. My mother died 10 years ago, Catherine continued. She never talked about what happened in the 40s, but after she passed, I found letters. Letters she'd kept hidden all her life. Letters about the fraud, about her relationship with Daniel Thornton, about how she'd known what they were doing was wrong, but had been too scared to stop it. Catherine pulled an envelope from her purse. She wrote one final letter before she died. She wanted it given to Arthur Chen if he was ever found, or to his family if he wasn't. The lawyer only just located me after seeing the documentary. I want you to have this. Emma took the envelope with shaking hands. Thank you. That night, alone in her hotel room, Emma opened the letter. It was dated 2008, written in a frail hand that suggested the writer had been very ill. Dear Arthur, it began. I don't know if you're still alive. I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. But I need to try to say what I should have said 60 years ago. Thank you. Thank you for being brave when I was a coward. Thank you for doing what I couldn't do, standing up to Daniel and his family, protecting the evidence, refusing to let them bury the truth. I've lived with guilt every day since I fled San Francisco. Guilt for my affair, guilt for my complicity, Guilt for not speaking up when Margaret Thornton died. I told myself I was young, that I was scared, that I couldn't have made a difference. But that's not true. I could have testified. I could have gone to the newspapers. I could have done something. Instead, I ran. I married a good man, had children, built a quiet life. But I never forgave myself. I followed the news about the Thorntons for years, hoping someone would expose them. When they weren't caught, when they continued operating, when their children inherited their wealth and power without consequences, I felt despair. I'd been wrong to run, wrong to stay silent, and it was too late to make it right. But you, Arthur, you never gave up. You kept those bonds safe for decades. You sacrificed your own comfort to preserve evidence. You believed that someday justice would come. I don't have that faith anymore. I think the Thorntons will win because people like them always win. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope that somehow, somewhere, someone finds those bonds and finishes what you started. If you're reading this, Arthur, please know that I'm sorry. Sorry I wasn't stronger. Sorry I left you alone to fight. Sorry I took the easy path instead of the right one. And thank you for being the kind of person who chose principle over safety. The world needs more people like you. The letter was signed Simply Claire. Emma read it 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Claire Morrison had lived 50 years carrying guilt for not being as brave as Arthur. She died never knowing that his mission had succeeded, that the bonds had been found, that the Thorntons had finally faced consequences. But maybe, in some way, Claire had contributed too. Her letters, the ones Emma had found in the wardrobe, had been part of the evidence. Her written confession of the fraud had helped prove the Thorntons' guilt. Her courage in documenting the truth, even if she'd been too afraid to speak it publicly, had mattered. The next morning, Emma called Catherine Morrison. Your mother's story should be told too. She wasn't just a bystander. She was someone who struggled with an impossible choice and did what she could, even if she thought it wasn't enough. That's worth remembering. Would you tell it? Catherine asked. Would you include her in the foundation's work somehow? Yes. We'll create an award in her name. The Claire Morrison Award for people who speak up about fraud despite personal risk. We'll honor whistleblowers, the people who do the hard thing, even when they're scared. Catherine's voice broke. She would have liked that. Thank you. Emma hung up and looked out at the New York skyline. How many stories were out there like Claire's? How many people struggled with doing the right thing when the cost was so high? How many chose silence and regretted it? How many spoke up and paid the price? Arthur's story was extraordinary, yes. But it was also a reminder that ordinary people face these choices every day. And every choice mattered. Every act of courage, no matter how small, pushed the world a little bit closer to justice. The foundation expanded its mission. They began offering protection and support for whistleblowers, people who exposed fraud at their companies and faced retaliation. They funded legal defense for employees fired for reporting misconduct. They created a network of lawyers, accountants, and investigators who helped ordinary people take on corrupt institutions. Within 3 years, the Arthur Chen Foundation had helped expose fraud totaling over $2 billion. They'd assisted in prosecutions that sent 23 white-collar criminals to prison. They'd recovered money for hundreds of victims, and they'd inspired other organizations to do similar work. Emma's inheritance, $122 million minus the $10 million she'd donated to start the foundation, minus taxes and expenses, had grown through careful investment to $156 million. She lived on less than 1% of the annual returns, reinvesting the rest. At this rate, the foundation would be able to continue its work for generations. Lily graduated high school with honors and headed to Stanford. During her first semester, she called Emma crying. Mom, I met someone today, an elderly woman who came to speak to my law and ethics class. She said her grandfather was one of the workers cheated by the Thorntons in the 1940s. She said when her family got the restitution check from great-grandpa Arthur's case, it saved her father's business. He'd been about to lose everything, and that money gave him a second chance. Lily's voice shook. She wanted me to thank you. She said her family owed everything to what you and great-grandpa did. And I realized how big this is, Mom. How many lives were changed. How much good came from great-grandpa's choice to protect those bonds? That's his real legacy, Emma said softly. Not the money, the choice, the refusal to give up, the belief that justice matters even when it seems impossible. I want to be like him, like you. I want to fight for people. You will, baby. You already are. At 23, Lily graduated from Stanford Law and immediately joined the Foundation's legal team. She was fierce, brilliant, uncompromising in her pursuit of justice. Watching her daughter cross-examine a corrupt financial advisor in court, Emma felt Arthur's presence somehow, his spirit living on through the granddaughter he'd never met. 10 years after finding the bonds, Emma finally felt at peace. The wardrobe still stood in her bedroom, a daily reminder of where it all began. The hidden compartment remained, though now it held something different. Letters from people the Foundation had helped, photos of Arthur and Lily, copies of news articles about cases they'd won. The compartment that once held evidence of crime now held evidence of justice. Evidence that one person's courage could cascade through time and touch countless lives. Evidence that ordinary people, when they refused to accept corruption, could change the world. Emma touched the carved wood, thinking about the hands that had built this hiding place. Thinking about her grandfather carefully stacking bonds inside, knowing he was sacrificing his own future to protect strangers. Thinking about the 75 years he'd waited, never giving up hope that someday the truth would matter. "We did it, Grandpa," she whispered. "Your story is being told. Your victims got justice. Your great-granddaughter is carrying on your fight. You didn't sacrifice for nothing." Outside, the sun was setting. Lily's voice called from downstairs. She was home for dinner, probably bringing case files to discuss. The Foundation's work never stopped. There were always more victims, more fraud, more fights to win. But Emma didn't mind. This was her life's work now. Her inheritance wasn't the money, it was the mission. The unshakable belief that justice, no matter how delayed, was worth fighting for. That truth mattered. That ordinary people could stand against the powerful and win. Arthur Chen had bet his entire life on those principles. And 75 years later, his granddaughter had proven that bet wasn't in vain. The wardrobe stood silent in the bedroom, its secret finally revealed, its burden finally lifted. But its legacy would endure for generations, a reminder carved in oak and sacrifice that some treasures are worth more than gold. And the greatest treasure of all was knowing you'd lived with integrity, no matter the cost. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.